The words hit me like a brick. "Get out of here," John said, his voice cold and final. I stood there, frozen, unable to move or speak. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the situation. Why was this happening? What had I done to deserve this? My name is Wendy Smith. I'm 52 years old, and for most of my life, I've tried to do everything right. I've worked hard as a full-time employee at a food manufacturing company, helped raise our son Matt, and taken care of my husband John, and my elderly mother-in-law Diane. Life wasn't perfect, but I thought we were a happy family. But here I was, standing in our living room, feeling like everything was falling apart. The tension had been building for months, but I didn't see this coming. John, the man I married 30 years ago, now stood before me, looking at me like I was a stranger. John and I met when he worked at an advertising agency. Back then, he was warm, funny, and full of energy. He had a way of making everything seem brighter, and it wasn't long before we fell in love. We got married, had Matt, and built what I thought was a strong foundation for a life together. But things started to change about 10 years ago. John left his job at the agency and decided to start his own business. At first, I was worried. I had a stable job, but we still had bills to pay, and with Matt heading into high school, our expenses were only going to increase. John assured me that everything would be fine, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. Despite my concerns, I supported him. I wanted him to be happy, and I believed in his abilities. His business did well at first, and things seemed to be going smoothly. He even had more time to spend with Matt, which was great for their relationship. But soon, cracks began to show. One of the biggest challenges we faced as a family was taking care of John's mother, Diane. She had always been independent, but as she aged, her health started to decline. Her legs grew weak, and she needed more help around the house. I did my best to care for her, but it wasn't easy. Between my job and managing the house, I was stretched thin. John, however, acted like it wasn't his responsibility. "She's your mother, too," I would say, hoping he would help more, but he always turned away, pretending he didn't hear me. This lack of support weighed heavily on me. I couldn't understand how he could ignore his own mother's needs. Diane herself had mentioned a few times that she was considering moving to a nursing home, but I knew that was the last thing John wanted. He couldn't bear the thought of his mother being away, yet he didn't want to help take care of her either. As time passed, things only got worse. John's business started to struggle, but he didn't want to admit it. He spent more time out of the house, coming home late and wearing new suits that I knew we couldn't afford. When I asked about the suits, he brushed it off, saying it was important to look professional. Something didn't feel right, but I didn't want to accuse him of anything without proof. I remembered reading somewhere that sudden changes in appearance or behavior could be a sign of infidelity, but I didn't want to believe that of John. After all, we had been through so much together. How could he betray me like that? Still, the doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Every time he left the house without explanation, I felt a knot in my stomach. Was he really working late, or was there someone else? Then, one night, everything came crashing down. Diane had an accident while trying to go to the bathroom. Thankfully, it wasn't serious, but it was a wake-up call for her. The next morning, she sat me down and said, "Wendy, I've decided. I'm going to move to a nursing home." I was stunned. She had always been so proud and determined to stay in her own home. But now, she was asking for help, and I couldn't say no. I knew it would be hard on John, but I also knew it was the best decision for Diane's safety and well-being. When I brought it up to John, his reaction was worse than I expected. He was furious. "You're abandoning my mother," he shouted. I tried to explain that it was Diane's choice, but he wouldn't listen. He accused me of caring more about my job than his family. "If it's too much for you, then quit your job," he yelled. I was speechless. My job was the only thing keeping us afloat. John's business wasn't bringing in enough money, and without my income, we wouldn't be able to pay the bills. But he didn't want to hear that. He was too proud to admit that he needed me to support the family. The argument over Diane was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the tension between John and me grew unbearable. Every time I tried to talk to him about our finances or Diane's care, he shut me down. He didn't want to deal with the reality of our situation. One evening, after yet another argument, I sat alone in the kitchen, trying to figure out what to do. Something had to change, but I didn't know how to fix it. Then, one day, John dropped the bombshell. "We're done," he said coldly. "I want a divorce." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. How could he do this? How could he throw away 30 years of marriage without a second thought? Before I could respond, he added, "Matt and Sarah are moving in. You need to leave." His words hit me like a knife to the heart. Not only was he ending our marriage, but he was replacing me in our home with our son and his wife. That night, I packed my bags and left the house. I couldn't believe this was happening. Everything I had worked for was slipping away, and I felt powerless to stop it. But as I walked away from the life I had known for so long, something inside me shifted. I realized that I didn't have to be a victim in this story. I still had control over my future, and I was determined to show John that he couldn't just throw me away like I didn't matter. The next morning, I met with a lawyer and started the process of filing for divorce. I also demanded a $10,000 settlement from John. He hesitated at first, but when I hinted that I might have evidence of his affair, he quickly agreed. Over the next few weeks, I moved into a small apartment and began rebuilding my life. I still visited Diane at the nursing home every weekend, and although it was hard, I felt a sense of relief. I was finally free from the constant stress and arguments. Then, one day, Matt called me out of the blue. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice tense. "The account is empty. What's going on?" I smiled to myself. I had expected this call. When I left, I made sure to empty the account that I had been using to cover the family's living expenses. Matt and Sarah had assumed that I would continue supporting them, but I had no intention of doing that anymore. "You were supposed to deposit your own money into that account," I said calmly. "I'm not responsible for you anymore." Matt was silent for a moment, then he blurted out, "I lost my job." As Matt explained how he had been laid off and how he and Sarah had been living off their savings, I felt a sense of satisfaction. This was the price they had to pay for betraying me. They had kicked me out of the house, assuming that I would still take care of everything, but now they were realizing how much they had relied on me. I told Matt that he needed to figure things out on his own. I wasn't going to bail them out. In the following weeks, I heard through the grapevine that John's business had completely collapsed. Apparently, he had been spending company funds on his mistress, and when the truth came out, the business went bankrupt. Matt, now jobless, couldn't support the family, and they were forced to sell the house to cover their debts. Now, a few months later, I've settled into my new life. I still visit Diane, and she sometimes asks if I'll ever remarry, but for now, I'm happy being on my own. I've learned that I don't need anyone else to validate my worth. I heard that John and Matt are both working odd jobs, struggling to make ends meet while Sarah has moved back in with her parents. It's strange to think that the family I once knew has fallen apart, but I feel nothing but relief. For the first time in years, I'm free. Free from the weight of other people's expectations, free from the constant pressure to keep everything together. I'm finally living for myself. And as for John, he made his choice. Now he has to live with the consequences.